Humanity's lone starship, Aegis 1, had become a subject of ridicule throughout the galaxy. Across the stars, the galaxy's advanced species watched the small Terran ship with a mix of amusement and disdain. To them, humanity was still a child, in the vast playground of the cosmos, immature, untested, and outclassed by the ancient civilizations that had ruled for millennia. Despite humanity's potential, their technology was crude, their ships modest, and their weapons primitive when compared to the vast fleets of their alien counterparts. Aegis 1 was humanity's first foray into interstellar peacekeeping, but the mission was far from promising. The ship was small, its crew largely untrained for such grand intergalactic diplomacy, and the technology aboard was decades behind what the galaxy's dominant species had come to expect. When Aegis 1 set its course for a volatile star system, the galaxy scoffed, expecting the mission to fail even before it began. The crew of Aegis 1, humanity's finest, led by Commander Elise Ardent, had no illusions about the situation. They knew the galaxy thought of them as weak, as insignificant players who had no place among the stars. But Elise had something no one could take away from her or her crew, an unwavering human spirit. A spirit that refused to surrender, no matter the odds. The ship itself was far from perfect, but it embodied humanity's core strength, the will to fight, adapt, and survive against overwhelming odds. As Aegis 1 entered the star system embroiled in a brewing conflict, Commander Ardent could sense the tension on the bridge. Her crew, though inexperienced, had trained relentlessly, pushing themselves to their limits. But no amount of preparation could fully prepare them for the challenges they would face in the unknown expanse of space. They were about to enter a diplomatic minefield where every decision could determine the fate of entire civilizations. As they arrived, they found themselves in the middle of an impending war between two powerful alien factions, both of whom saw humanity as a mere footnote in their cosmic struggles. The Terrans had been called upon to mediate, but no one, least of all the aliens, believed they would succeed. The Aegis 1 wasn't just outgunned, it was outmatched in every conceivable way. Elise's mind raced as she surveyed the scene on the view screen. The alien ships were massive and sleek, their weapons far more advanced, their fleet's numbers beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of. But Commander Ardent was determined not to back down. She knew her crew would follow her anywhere, even into the depths of what seemed like certain defeat. The mission was dangerous, but failure was not an option. As the alien ships locked their eyes on the Aegis 1, Commander Ardent could almost feel the weight of every galactic race watching, waiting for humanity to stumble. She stood firm, making a silent vow that humanity would not be dismissed so easily. No matter the size or power of the adversaries before them, she would show them that the human spirit was more dangerous than any weapon or fleet. And so, with a single command, the crew of Aegis 1 braced themselves for the unknown. It would be a trial by fire, a test not only of their skills and technology, but of their very will to survive. They weren't just fighting for their ship, they were fighting for humanity's place in a galaxy that had already written them off. The Aegis 1 was more than just a ship. It was the first step in proving that humanity was not the galaxy's joke. And soon, the other species would understand the true strength of humankind, something no weapon could measure and no fleet could ever defeat. As the first shots rang out in the distance, Commander Ardent steeled herself. The Aegis 1 was about to show the galaxy what humanity was made of, and it would never be underestimated again. The situation on the Aegis 1 grew increasingly, dire as the crew found themselves in the heart of a brewing galactic storm. The star system, once thought to be a neutral ground, was now the site of a fierce confrontation between two hostile alien fleets. These fleets, massive and heavily armed, were on the verge of war, and the Terran ship, a tiny speck in comparison, had been sent as a peacekeeping force. But far from calming the situation, the mere presence of the Aegis 1 only seemed to fuel the fire. The alien ships, sleek and menacing, cruised past the Terran vessel, their imposing size dwarfing the Aegis one. To them, the Terran ship was little more than an afterthought, hardly even worth considering in the grand scheme of galactic power. The crew aboard the Aegis one was well aware of the stakes. They knew they were outclassed, outnumbered, and outmatched in every sense. Commander Elise Ardent, ever determined, understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It was about survival. Before she could even give an order, the first attack came. A missile, fired from one of the alien factions, struck dangerously close to the Aegis one, sending the ship spiraling out of control. The sudden force of the blast rocked the crew, alarms blaring across the bridge. The impact left the ship vulnerable, and for a moment, it seemed like the end was near. For a brief second, Elise felt the weight of uncertainty. Were they really ready for this? Could they hold their ground against forces that outstripped them in every way? But then the moment passed. Elise snapped out of it, her mind focused and clear. There was no time for hesitation. She barked orders, urging the crew into action. The Aegis one, despite its outdated systems, had one advantage: the agility of the ship. With a rapid series of evasive maneuvers, the ship veered sharply away from the enemy fire. The sleek alien warships pursued relentlessly, but the Aegis one twisted and darted through the void, dodging their attacks with surprising grace. The crew worked like a well-oiled machine, their faces grim but resolute. They had no time for doubts now. Elise gave the order, a single resolute command: engage. The Aegis one was no longer a passive observer. It was a participant in a deadly game, and its only chance for survival was to fight back. The ship's weapons, though rudimentary compared to the alien fleets, flared to life with a ferocity that caught their enemies off guard. The first blast from the Aegis one struck one of the alien ships, a direct hit to its shield generators. The alien vessel staggered, its defensive systems flickering. A cheer erupted from the crew as they realized they'd done it. Despite being underpowered and outclassed, they had landed a hit. Elise's heart raced as she looked at the results of their first strike. It wasn't a victory, not by any means, but it was something much more important. It was a sign. The Aegis one, against all odds, was not going down without a fight. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. The Aegis one was proving that human ingenuity could still make a difference in a galaxy filled with technological giants. The enemy fleets, surprised by the damage, hesitated, momentarily thrown off balance. It was just enough for the Aegis one to make a swift retreat into the cover of nearby asteroids, forcing the alien ships to regroup. The damage to the Terran ship was substantial, but the crew remained undeterred. Commander Ardent's face was set in a grim smile as she ordered the crew to prepare for the next round. The galaxy had thought they were nothing more than a joke, but now they had proven that humanity's resolve could stand toe-to-toe with the greatest powers in the universe. The battle was far from over, but one thing was certain: Aegis one wasn't about to be forgotten. Humanity, with all its flaws and imperfections, had just made its first mark on the galaxy, and it would not be the last. The battle around the Aegis one continued to intensify, but the ship and its crew were far from backing down. Despite being outnumbered and outclassed in terms of firepower and technology, the Terran ship had become an unexpected thorn in the side of the alien fleets. The aliens, who had once mocked the humans for their single, small vessel, now found themselves struggling to adapt to the unpredictability of their opponent. The Aegis one, far from being an easy target, had shown that humanity was capable of thinking outside the box in ways that the more advanced fleets couldn't anticipate. Every time the ship was cornered, it found a way to turn the tables. It wasn't always about brute force. Humans, it seemed, were masters of survival through clever tactics, exploiting every advantage and using the environment around them in ways the enemy couldn't foresee. While the alien ships had cutting-edge technology and vast firepower, the crew of the Aegis one was armed with something much more dangerous: human ingenuity. The situation came to a head when Elise Ardent and her crew were assigned a critical task. The enemy had established a powerful position near a massive asteroid field, one that the larger alien ships had turned into an impenetrable stronghold. The asteroid field, with its sharp, jagged rocks and dense debris, made it almost impossible for the Terran ship to maneuver without being torn apart by the surroundings. It seemed like an impossible task, but Elise saw an opportunity. The Aegis I may have been smaller and slower, but it could weave through the asteroid field like no other ship could. Using the terrain to their advantage, Elise ordered her crew to take the Aegis I into the heart of the field, knowing the enemy would be forced to follow them. The maneuver was a gamble. If they made one wrong move, the ship would be lost in the debris. But the risk was their only chance. With precision and skill, the Aegis I navigated through the asteroid field, using the massive chunks of rock and rubble as both cover and weapons. The larger enemy ships had no such luxury. They tried to follow, but their size and speed made it impossible for them to maneuver in the dense asteroid belt. The Aegis I darted in and out of the shadows of the rocks, using its smaller size to outmaneuver the enemy. Then, when the time was right, Elise made her move. She lured the enemy ships deeper into the field, pushing them closer to a deadly trap. The Aegis I launched a barrage of firepower, hitting key points on the enemy ships that threw them into disarray. As the enemy struggled to recover, the asteroid field became a maze of chaos. Ships collided with asteroids, others were caught in the crossfire, and the once pristine battlefield turned into a deadly labyrinth of explosions and debris. In the midst of the chaos, one of the enemy's flagship vessels, proud and untouchable, only hours before, was struck by a stray missile and lost power, its shields failing as it careened into a massive asteroid. The once formidable ship was disabled in the blink of an eye, its enormous form reduced to a hulk drifting helplessly in space. The Aegis I had done it. It had taken down a key part of the enemy fleet with nothing but human cunning and a willingness to take risks. The crew erupted in a roar of victory, though they knew the fight was far from over. The galaxy, which had once laughed at humanity's audacity, now had to reassess everything they thought they knew about the Terrans. The Aegis I wasn't a ship defined by its technology or its firepower. It was defined by its crew's ability to think on their feet, adapt quickly, and fight with a tenacity that the galaxy had underestimated. Humanity had shown that it wasn't just about the size of the ship or the strength of the weapon. It was about how humans fought, how they outsmarted their enemies, and how they refused to give up, no matter the odds. For the first time, the galaxy was forced to acknowledge the true strength of humanity, not in the technology they wielded, but in the will that drove them. The Aegis I had made its mark, and no one in the galaxy would forget the lesson it had taught them. Underestimate humanity at your own peril. The battle had reached its boiling point, and the stakes had never been higher for the crew of the Aegis I. As they pressed forward, the true enemy behind the conflict was revealed. The Vorin, an ancient alien race feared and reviled across the galaxy for their unmatched technological superiority and their brutal, unforgiving tactics. These were not the kind of beings who sought peace or negotiation. The Vorin's only desire was domination, and they had come to claim this star system as their own. For humanity, it was a nightmare scenario. Commander Elise Ardent understood the gravity of their situation. The odds were overwhelmingly against them, and the Aegis I, though resilient, was a far cry from the sleek, powerful warships of the Vorin. But she also understood something else. Humanity's strength didn't lie in their ships or weapons. It lay in their ability to adapt, to think creatively, and to outsmart their enemies. If the humans were going to survive this, they would have to rely on what made them unique, their unpredictability. In a bold, nearly suicidal move, Elise made a decision that shocked even her seasoned crew. She ordered the Aegis I to infiltrate the heart of the Vorin fleet. The plan was risky, almost insane, but there was no other choice. They were outgunned and outnumbered, and the only chance they had of stopping the Vorin would be to strike directly at the center of their power, their flagship. The Aegis I was small, fast, and nimble, but it was far from invincible. It was a ship that relied on cunning and resourcefulness rather than brute strength. Elise's crew, though inexperienced, had trained relentlessly to face the impossible. They were prepared for anything. As they neared the Vorin flagship, the crew set their plan into motion. Decoys were launched, fooling the enemy sensors into thinking there were more ships than there actually were. Meanwhile, the Aegis I took advantage of the confusion to infiltrate the heart of the Vorin fleet. Cyber warfare was unleashed, Terran engineers scrambling to hack into the Vorin systems, disabling key defense systems, and opening the way for a devastating attack. The Vorin fleet, which had once seemed invincible, was now facing an enemy they didn't understand: human ingenuity. The first wave of attacks hit with precision, causing chaos among the enemy ranks. But the Vorin were no strangers to battle, and they responded quickly. A hail of fire returned from their massive warships, and Aegis I was struck with a direct hit. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blared, and the crew was thrown into chaos. For a moment, it seemed like the end was near. The Aegis I had taken severe damage, and the Vorin flagship loomed closer, almost mocking the humans with its intimidating presence. But Commander Elise Ardent refused to retreat. There was no turning back now. She could see the fear and determination in the eyes of her crew, and she knew they would follow her to the ends of the galaxy. They had come this far, and they would not falter now. Through gritted teeth, Elise gave the order to push forward. The Aegis I maneuvered, battered but still operational, through the hail of enemy fire. The crew worked together like a single organism, each member playing their part to keep the ship alive long enough to finish the mission. The Vorin flagship loomed in their sights, its shields flickering weakly after the earlier barrage. Elise seized the moment. She ordered a final all-out attack. The Aegis I launched everything it had, its weapon systems flaring to life one last time. A powerful shot found its mark, slamming into the heart of the Vorin flagship. The enemy ship staggered, its massive hull crackling with energy as its shields failed and its engines went dark. In the aftermath, the Vorin fleet, stunned and disoriented by the destruction of their flagship, faltered. Without their leadership, they lost their coordination and began to retreat, fleeing into the depths of space. The Aegis I, though crippled and battered, had done the impossible. It had taken down the Vorin flagship, striking a decisive blow to one of the galaxy's most feared forces. As the remaining enemy ships scattered, the crew of the Aegis I stood in stunned silence. They had won. Against all odds, against the overwhelming might of an ancient alien empire, humanity had triumphed. Commander Elise Ardent looked at her crew, each of them battered but alive, and a slow smile spread across her face. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and now it would never forget the name of the Aegis I. The impossible had happened. Humanity had won, and the galaxy would never again look at humanity the same way. The war was over, and against all expectations, the Aegis I had emerged victorious. The galaxy, once skeptical and dismissive of humanity, now found itself forced to reconsider everything it thought it knew about the Terrans. The victory was not just a military one, it was a statement. The Aegis I had shown the universe that humanity was not weak, nor were they to be dismissed as a mere curiosity. What the galaxy had underestimated was the immense power of human resolve. The Terrans had proven that their strength lay not in superior technology or overwhelming firepower, but in their unwavering will, determination, and their unyielding spirit to never give up, no matter the odds. Commander Elise Ardent and her crew, once viewed as mere pawns in a larger game, were now hailed as heroes. The universe had witnessed the Terran ship, Aegis I, stand tall against impossible odds and emerge victorious. Elise, though a quiet leader, knew that this victory was not just for humanity, but for every underdog who had ever been told they were too small, too weak, or too insignificant to matter. The Aegis One had proven that there was more to strength than just the size of one's weapons or the power of one's fleet. It was about the strength of character, the courage to fight for what was right, and the relentless pursuit of victory, no matter how dire the circumstances. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, and the victory had far-reaching implications. No longer would the Terrans be viewed as newcomers or weaklings. Instead, their legacy was now woven into the fabric of galactic history. The Aegis One became a symbol, not of destruction, but of hope. A beacon that showed what humanity could accomplish when united under a single purpose. It was not about their technology, which was still far behind many of the advanced species they faced. It was about something far more powerful, the human ability to adapt, to outthink, and to persevere when the odds seemed insurmountable. As the Aegis One sailed back toward Earth, a symbol of human triumph in the face of overwhelming adversity, the galaxy watched in awe. The battle had been won, but the real victory was in the message it sent. Humanity had arrived, not as a mere footnote in galactic history, but as a force to be reckoned with. There was no turning back now. The Terrans had proven that their place in the stars was earned, and their legacy would continue to shape the future of the galaxy. Commander Elise Ardent stood at the bridge of the Aegis One, looking out at the stars, knowing that the journey was far from over. The war had ended, but humanity's future was just beginning. As they returned home to Earth, the crew knew that the road ahead would be filled with new challenges, new allies, and new enemies. But one thing was certain: humanity would no longer be underestimated. The Aegis One had paved the way, and as they looked toward the future, the galaxy would have to learn that the first human ship was only the beginning. What followed would be even greater, because humanity had proven that when they came together, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. The legacy of the Aegis One would live on, not just as a story of victory, but as a testament to the unbreakable spirit of humankind, a force that would echo throughout the stars for centuries to come.